So I suppose I joined the Grail as a deliberate choice in my very early 20s, but I had been part of it as a member of my family from the day dot. My mother was a Grail member, and so I brought along her little Grail badge. We don't wear badges anymore, but back in the day I found it amongst her things when she passed away at the age of nearly 100. So in my mum and dad's wedding photos in South Hurstville in 1944, I think it would have been, there were young Grail women in uniforms holding flags as a guard of honour from the footpath into the church. And so as we grew up, the members of the family, the kids, were used to going for picnics with the Grail women, and my dad often was doing things, helping with them. They had a property at Springwood which they used for schoolgirl camps at the time, and we lived at Penrith. And so I remember my dad telling me about having to take the Grail cow from the property at Springwood over to the seminary on the other side of Springwood to meet the bull, so that the Grail cow would be in calf then the following year. My parents and some of these other families and the Grail women themselves, I think, had connected up with the Dutch women as they came to Australia, and of course it was still, when they arrived, the time of the hard times in Europe, and the Second World War hadn't even begun probably when they arrived in Australia. But we grew up really enjoying things like homegrown vegetables and prayers around the table that were inspired by the Grail women right from the word go. Faith was part of everyday life, and while we were part of the parish as Catholics, practising Catholics, and went to Catholic schools and so on, it was very much the Grail way of being people of faith that was the gift our family had already at that time. And so when I was, as I say, in my 20s, I was invited with other young people to be part of a kind of discussion group here at this house in Avila, and made a decision at that point to become a member in my own right. And why am I a member? It's kind of like, a comfortable raincoat that you put on. It's part of your life, you never think about it, but as the years have gone by, I've been involved with lots of different kinds of Grail activities, I suppose. One of the big ones has been the opportunity to meet Grail women, and in some cases young people, older people, men and women, in different parts of the world. As I've travelled, I've always made a point and been lucky enough to connect up with Grail women in other parts of the world. With my husband Bill, so when we first were married, we met others from Australia, but also from Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, other parts of the Pacific, at what was called the first Grail Pacific Summer School in Suva in Fiji. And from then on, every place we've been living or gone visiting, in my case, I have been set out to meet the Grail women and enjoyed the companionship that's come as a result of that. In 2006, Bill and I had the opportunity to take a kind of sabbatical year, and we were able to go to Uganda through our Grail connections and live on the campus of a post-secondary college there, and did a little bits of English tutoring, not so much for the Ugandans who had English in their secondary school, but for the students who'd come from Sudan, from Tanzania, who didn't have English as a first language so much. Bill did a bit of partnering, mentoring with the deputy of the college in setting up an accounting system and so on. But it reminded me very much then of how the Grail had been in the early days in Australia, in that there was an emphasis on young women coming into the Grail for programs of study and living in a way that hasn't happened now in Australia for quite some years. The Grail is very different in different parts of the world, and it's been a great richness for me and for Bill and I as a couple to experience that. So when we left for our working holiday after the Pacific Summer School in Fiji, we headed off to Minnesota, where Bill's mother had come as a war bride. She'd come from there after the Second World War, having met her husband, Bill's father, in Papua New Guinea. And so we pretty quickly found Grail women in Minneapolis and St. Paul and connected up with them, and then visited Grailville in Ohio, and the Grail women who were down in San Jose in California, and some who were in Louisiana. So travel and the Grail has always gone together for me. I did have the opportunity also then on one occasion to meet women, Grail women, in their own places in Portugal, in Paris, in Rome, in India, Delhi, as I was travelling at different times, and met up with them and found out from them how their involvement with the Grail was part of their life, and some of them had made a lifetime commitment and were what we call nucleus members of the Grail, as the ones who live here in this house in Avila mostly are. Others were involved in their professional life, married, single, whatever, but the Grail was a way for them to be in a community of faith that was always looking to make the connections between their faith and their work and their celebrating. We're very good at celebrating in the Grail. For me, the Grail has become a resource that I turn to for spiritual nourishment, but also intellectual support as I wrestle with the challenges that there are in terms of being part of a faith community in a contemporary, very secular society. I worked as a secondary school teacher and principal then in Catholic schools. The Grail commitment and involvement was always a huge support to me in terms of being able to read and discuss and talk through the challenges of educating young people in Catholic schools in a time and a place where it was pretty countercultural if taken seriously. It was a resource always to me to be able to bring from my Grail connections a wider viewpoint and a more nuanced understanding perhaps of issues. So the Grail is very different here in Sydney at this time in 2020 from how it is in some other parts of the world, but also how it has been at different points in time. We are an ageing group. Our resources have led us to work in particularly, I suppose, careful ways that are manageable for a small group. So one of the things that we've done in recent years has been to prepare and produce and publish and distribute a personal journal that is developed so that it can be particularly used by people who are either in prison or in asylum seekers who are in detention centres or homebound people. So the idea of the journal is that it has inspirational images and quotations, but lots of space for personal writing, but that copies are sold, and for each copy that is sold, another copy is made available then to be distributed either through the prison system or in the detention centres or to people who are not in a position perhaps to have such a resource available to them. So it's a project that has been inspired by the professional involvement in the first instance of one of our Grail members, and was something that could be done by us as a small group of women, some retired, some working in their professions, able to put a resource into the hands of others who might not otherwise have such a resource, and where there was an expressed need that we became aware of. The opportunity to meet and read and discuss and pray about the challenge of global warming and the crisis of the environmental changes that we've become particularly aware of this century, the end of last century. And so there would be a very strong theme through our writing and meeting and praying and Saturday seminars and workshops that we offer to ourselves, but also more widely to others who are interested. The whole challenge of ecological conversion and change in our lives to make a contribution towards preventing the worst damage of global warming. One more strong strand is that of spiritual contemplation, reflection, resources to assist the person who is perhaps not necessarily a practicing believer of any particular faith tradition, but who values and learns from the work and support of others the practices of reflection and contemplation, and including that as part of everyday life. Not an easy thing to do on your own, something that the great religious traditions, all of them, have brought to us as humans now in this particular point in time, and which we see the value of and want to share with others. So we have reflection mornings here at the centre in North Sydney. We have Lectio Divina, the Benedictine way of reading and thinking and praying a sacred text or a secular text. That is a regular part of the work of the group here in North Sydney. We would have a strong strand of social justice interest, so that we would often be searching out speakers or resources, printed, texts that might be able to challenge our own thinking and take us to be able to contribute in other parts of our lives from the discussions and thinking that we've done together as a Grail group. I suppose when I look at the offerings that the Grail can make available, the first one is a like-minded group of particularly women, but of men and women, for whom their faith is important and it's not separated from their day-to-day life and context, so that it's okay to talk about our spiritual life, the fact that we may relish the opportunity for prayer, either individually but more often shared prayer, that the challenges of our professional work are appropriate topics for analysis and conversation and reflection within a framework that is enriched by spiritual practice and belief, not necessarily of a particular tradition. For my own children, I can see at times they have a hunger for this. They would, having grown up with a mother who was an active Grail member, never imagine themselves as being seeking to have that conversation or opportunity with others in the Grail because of our demography, but from time to time it is of great interest to a younger person, particularly a younger woman.